Senator Payman.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. The Chair's kindly allowed for the circulation of some material, but I was just going to ask the Department if you've reviewed the Nauru Government's Notice of Information on Working Rights of Transferees in Nauru, which essentially indicates that people seeking asylum may face prosecution or removal for undertaking work.
Is that the document that you're having circulated?
Yes, yeah. So I take it that you haven't seen any notice or information on this as to date?
Senator, sorry for the long delay.
No, that's okay.
We're just trying to absorb the information. The three of us have not seen it. In saying this, I'm inviting any of my staff who might have to let me know.
No worries.
And our initial look at it indicates that it relates to people there transferred for regional processing.
And the arrangement that we know Nauru has, and we're certainly very comfortable with, is that Nauru, when somebody is transferred for regional processing, that is their unauthorised maritime arrival, and they're transferred to Nauru, they don't have work rights until they've finished the refugee assessment process. Mm-hmm. Once they complete the refugee assessment process there, if they're found to be a refugee, then they do have work rights, which is what's articulated, I think, in paragraph 4 of this document. If they're found not to have work rights, then if they're found not to be owed protection and not a refugee, then they don't gain work rights. So while we're not familiar with this document, as you've produced it, we are certainly well familiar with the arrangement for work rights for people who are going through the refugee status determination process.
And that status determination process, how long is that roughly going to take, or is set to take? Just because I'm aware that the current community allowance is about $230 per fortnight, and it's reported as being obviously very insufficient to meet basic needs such as food, water and essential items. So just curious to understand, will those transferees be able to have an adequate standard of living?
Senator Michael Thomas, Deputy Secretary, Immigration Compliance. I don't have the exact sort of average time of the RSD, the Refugee Status Determination process, but it is relatively short. However, people that have a negative outcome through that process can appeal it through Nauru's appeal process, and that's often what takes the time. So there is an appeals process available to individuals as well.
So, Senator, just to give you a sense, without being bound by it, it's months rather than years that the process takes for that initial stage. And it's one of the priorities in our new agreement around regional processing that process be expedited.
And when you say expedited, do we know how short you would prefer the process be?
I believe there are time periods specified in our arrangement with the Government of Nauru, but I don't know those off the top of my head. Mr. Biddington?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Ben Biddington, First Assistant Secretary, Offshore Programs and International Cooperation. We work to have the process, the RSD process, which is legislated in Nauruan legislation, and so therefore it's a process undertaken by the Nauruan government within a 60-day time frame.
60-day time frame, okay. And just out of curiosity, I'm not an expert in international human rights or refugee law obligations, but would you say that would, I guess, even just the threat of removing transferees who undertake any form of work while they're being processed, I guess. Does that meet their basic needs, and whether that aligns with Australia's international human rights obligations?
I haven't seen that document, Senator.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I think, Senator, it would be unwise for Mr Biddington to comment cold, so let us take your last question on notice.
No worries.
But I think it's important to note that people are provided with a living allowance during that time period, and under international law, people who are applying for asylum need to be provided with an ability to sustain themselves. That can either be work rights or a living allowance.
And can I just confirm that that living allowance is $230 a fortnight?
Yeah, in addition to that, they also have housing provided and you know, utilities and the like. So that $233 is not the only support they receive while their refugee status is being considered.
Okay. Just curious to understand, knowing that there's been queries about obviously, or concerns rather, that Australia is obviously spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year on offshore processing. How much of that money actually reaches refugees on Nauru, and how much is going to private contractors and intermediaries?
Senator, the 230 amount is the money that's directly paid to the transferees to support them living in the community. The rest of the expenditure is for our contracted arrangements and to fund services and supports for them while they're being processed in Nauru.
Has there been any direct welfare checks on how the refugees are actually, whether the $233 is enough for them and how they're getting by, essentially?
We do review that payment annually, so it's an active process to determine that it's still fit for purpose in terms of the amount. It is compared against a range of factors, including the cost of living in Nauru, and it's compared against, you know, Nauruan wages on average in the same way that Australia calculates its job seeker rate. It's the same kind of process that we look at, and we do actively review it. In general, there's a robust healthcare sort of system and arrangements. There's regular check-ins, so there's an architecture around understanding where this group is at and supporting them.
And in the case or in the instance where a person is removed from Nauru, either for working or because they don't meet the status determination process, where are they sent to, and what safeguards are in place to prevent refoulement or harm, again, given Australia is responsible for their transfer and welfare?
Senator, at the moment of the recent arrivals to Nauru with regional processing, they've only voluntarily returned home. We haven't had any involuntary removals by the government of Nauru.
But in the instance where, you know, they are sent away or sent to another country, do we know where they're going to be sent off to?
So Nauru is a signatory to the Refugee Convention and in its own right is committed to non-refoulement independently of its relationship with us for regional processing. As Mr Thomas has just said, Nauru hasn't involuntarily removed anyone. So those who have been found not to be refugees either file an appeal and go through the appeals and justice system in Nauru, or they voluntarily are choosing to depart and return to their country of origin.
And that appeals process, is anybody assisting them, or is Australia taking responsibility and ensuring that they go through it and all the expenses are covered, essentially?
Australia does provide support for their Nauruan justice system, and I might need to take on notice the detail, but my understanding is, for example, from time to time Australian judges serve in the Nauruan court system, and we also provide funding for legal assistance, which Mr Thomas can take you through.
Thank
So
you.
we have a current contract, Senator, with International Crossover to provide protection claims assistance services for transferees.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll, and I look forward to receiving the answers to the questions on notice. Thank you so much.